YouTube. Welcome again to the My Whole Damn Collection series. This is part 2, and I'm going to be going over today everything that I have in my collection categorized under the letter A. I don't know, that felt very much like a Sesame Street thing. The letter of the day is A. So everything that I have categorized under the letter A, because I alphabetically categorize all of my DVDs and Blu Rays. This is a pretty good chunk here. It's probably going to be kind of a longer video. But if you enjoy what you see here, be sure to check out the part 1 I did of all of my box sets, which I'll leave a link in the description below for that. And it is should be put under the same playlist for my whole damn collection. First off, I have Alice in Wonderland, the 2-disc special edition, the special unanniversary edition. Just a little bit after this, Disney released an official anniversary edition, which I thought was very strange. But I think they rushed this release out just right before the Alice in Wonderland movie, live-action movie that Disney released last year, or the year before. Love this movie a lot. This has always been one of my favorite Disney movies. Very non-traditional narrative because it's based on the Lewis Carroll thing, and it does have sort of a psychedelic flavor to it, even though it was made sort of in the the 50s clean-cut sort of Disney era. But it's a very strange movie, and I always thought it's sort of weirdly creepy. Another animated film, I have Akira, the original anime. This is sort of the end-all be-all of anime as far as I'm concerned, specifically of the sort of cyberpunk late 80s era anime that had to do with a lot with post World War II paranoia and that kind of stuff. It deals with a strange story about a kid with psychic powers and a group the government is trying to control with psychic powers. If you saw the movie Chronicle recently, it echoed some ideas from this movie, I think. But I really like this one a lot, and I want to get the Blu-ray eventually. Here's a comedy that I think is sort of underrated, especially amongst the people who are in it, actor-wise, but it is Airheads, which is kind of a post Wayne's World comedy retelling of Dog Day Afternoon, about these 3 heavy metal rock band guys in a band called the Lone Rangers who hold up a radio station to get airplay, and it becomes like this big media fiasco, much like Dog Day Afternoon. But it's a great movie, and it comes with a decent amount of special features, a lot of music videos. We've got a Motorhead video and a White Zombie video in here. This kind of came out around, I think this came out in like 94, 95, before these 3 actors really took off individually, especially Adam Sandler, who would become a star shortly thereafter, and Steve Buscemi was doing a lot of independent work at the time. But it's a really funny movie, very, very, very 90s. If you like Wayne's World and you like the kind of Gen X-y type stuff, this is really good for that too. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is the 3rd in the Terry Gilliam's Imagination trilogy. Very strange, very surreal, almost indescribable. I wouldn't even really try in a video unless I was doing a specific review for it. All I say is if you like Monty Python and the Terry Gilliam stuff like Brazil and Time Bandits, then this would be up your alley. Yeah, strange. Definitely strange. It stars Robin Williams, About Schmidt, which is written and directed by Alexander Payne, one of my all-time favorite writer-directors, especially of the last 10 or so years. And this is, I think, one of his best movies. All of his movies are one of his best movies. It's really hard to say. He doesn't let down very often, but I really like this movie a lot. It's kind of a good Jack Nicholson movie where he's really playing his age. He doesn't really do that all that often. He definitely plays like the older professional, but you don't see him playing retired and specifically kind of an elderly sort of role. It's a movie about him kind of taking on the road after his wife passes away, and sort of existential journey that follows. But it's a comedy, and it's really funny, kind of a dark comedy, obviously, but really like this movie. Suppose it's superfluous to say that I really like these movies because I own them all. Why wouldn't I like them? Adaptation, which might be one of the last times that Nick Cage was in a good movie. And I believe he was he nominated for this movie? I think he might have been, or should have been at the very least. Great movie. It stars Nicolas Cage, Meryl Streep, and Chris Cooper. It's written by Charlie Kaufman, who also did Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and this is up there in the same sort of category as those two movies. Very strange, very outside of the box, breaks narrative in an interesting way, in that Charlie Kaufman sort of way, but also sort of darkly humorous at the same time. One of the cinematic achievements, I think, of the last 15 years. You'll hear me say things like that all the time, and I don't have any specific lists of cinematic achievements of the last 15 years. I might create a list, something like that, but you know, I have certain movies that float in my head when I think about that. Okay, and I have AI here, starring Haley Joel Osment, obviously, directed by Steven Spielberg. Kind of a flawed movie. It has its problems. The ending goes on way too long. There's some issues in the narrative that's not really resolved. Sort of half thoughts and ideas that don't get finished, but it is so ambitious, and it has a lot of interesting ideas in here. Of course, this was originally supposed to be directed by Stanley Kubrick, and he sort of passed the project on to Steven Spielberg, who passed on it actually until Kubrick died, and he decided to make it sort of in his honor. And so it has sort of a Kubrickian feel to it, as done by Steven Spielberg, and the two sensibilities, they're not oil and vinegar per se, but there is some weird clashing that goes on there, and almost for that alone it's interesting enough to own. So yeah, AI. Great Blu-ray, by the way, looks awesome. Almost Famous, probably my favorite movie by Cameron Crowe. This is the director's edition, which I believe if you get it in the Blu-ray now, it comes in a different case, but it is all the special features from here. But this is a really cool set. Comes with this Stillwater CD, all the songs that was recorded for the fictitious band in the movie, and there's I think 6 songs on here, so really cool. But yeah, this is done by Cameron Crowe, who is also the same writer-director who did Jerry Maguire and Elizabethtown and Say Anything. And this has always been, I think, my favorite movie from him because because it deals a lot with the early 70s rock music thing and about a kid who gets a tour with a rock band. So there's obviously sort of a wish fulfillment thing there, even though it was based on his life to some extent. But it's very autobiographical, and it's very moving, I think. Ken Russell's Altered States, which came out in 1980, starring John Hurt. Very strange movie. Very, very, very strange movie. It's about a scientist who creates a tank that he sits in a sensory deprivation tank. And he starts taking all these strange drugs that takes him into this primordial proto-human kind of state. I can't really describe the movie. It's sort of a science fiction horror movie of sorts, written by Paddy Chayefsky, a famous screenwriter who also did Network and Marty. But yeah, very bizarre film, but real kind of a gem of the early 80s, late 70s. And we have Adventureland, which I think is a really underrated movie, actually. It was directed by Greg Mottola, who is the same director who also did Paul most recently, but also did Superbad. And I think a lot of people went into this thinking it was going to be the next Superbad, but it has a completely different mode and mood and tone than that movie. It's very nostalgic, and it kind of has almost sort of more of a kind of an indie Sundancey sort of vibe to it, and it's more of a drama, I would say, than a comedy. It stars Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart. I never actually knew of Kristen Stewart's whole Bella Twilight thing because I avoided those movies. So when I saw this movie, this is what I think of when I think of Kristen Stewart, and she's very good in this movie. And so when I eventually saw one or some of those Twilight movies, I felt bad because I know that she can do better. But yeah, also has a good supporting cast too, Ryan Reynolds and Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader. Good movie. I'd say it's don't think Superbad going into it, but if you like sort of Jesse Eisenberg's more serious stuff, it's kind of along those lines. The Blu-ray of Amadeus. Don't have a whole lot to say about this movie. I mean, I like it a lot, obviously. And it's a director's cut, directed by Milos Forman, Oscar winner, 80s, about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's a great movie. The American, I've talked about this somewhat recently in another video, so again, I won't spend too much time on it. Kind of a slow burn, European-inflected thriller starring George Clooney, directed by Anton Corbijn, who also did the movie Control, and he did a lot of music videos before that. Looks terrific, but it's not a movie for everybody. If you don't like slow-moving, sort of interior dwelling character study thrillers, and you're not going to like this movie. But if you do like all those things, then it might be something worth looking at. American Beauty on DVD, because I don't want to buy that Blu-ray until they put on some better special features. But this is one of my all-time favorite movies, one of my all-time favorite Oscar-winning movies, and one of the few times where I really thought they got it right and gave the award to the best movie of that year. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this movie other than everything about it is great. The writing is perfect. The direction by Sam Mendes is perfect. The cast, everybody hits their notes perfectly. It's I think, a true cinematic achievement of that time. American Gangster. At the video store that I work at, I think I was telling somebody that I think this was the last really good movie that Ridley Scott has done. I can't really think of one post this movie that I liked a whole lot, but this movie's really good. It has kind of an epic feel to it. Reminds me a lot of The Godfather in some ways, but sort of with an African American slant to it. It takes place in the 70s. Also has Russell Crowe in it. Denzel Washington is the star, of course, but it's a well thought, well put together movie, and very kind of different in some ways from a lot of other Ridley Scott projects. American History X. I think this is in a lot of people's collections, especially people my age who really kind of identify with the angst of this movie. Not the racist angst, exactly, but just the overall social tension of this movie. I really like it a lot, and a lot of good performances in there. Edward Norton, I would say it should have been a star-making performance from him. It might have even been sort of. And Edward Furlong in there from Terminator 2 is really good, plays his little brother. Has to do with, if you've never seen the movie before, and I would have a hard time believing that you haven't, it has to do with a white supremacist who is put in prison and sort of changes his views on things, but when he's released, he has to get his little brother out of that mindset. But it's a great movie. Two I'll show at the same time to kind of speed things along, but I have American Werewolf in London and American Werewolf in Paris. Now, American Werewolf in London is a lot better than American Werewolf in Paris, but I still kind of like this movie for some reason. I think maybe it's because when I was a kid I saw this movie before I saw American Werewolf in London. Now, I know that this one's the better of the two, but I just have kind of a soft spot for this movie because it's one of the first werewolf movies I ever saw, even though it's just kind of ripping off the first one in a lot of ways. Although there is, kind of weirdly enough, going from American History X to this, I guess I'm talking about this more only because it's not as talked about as often, but there is kind of a funny, interesting thing in here about these sort of these skinhead werewolf cults in Paris who sort of trap people in raves and then attack them and eat them. I thought that was kind of a cool little addition to the werewolf lore that was created in American Werewolf in London. But I mean, other than that, other than kitsch value, it's not that great of a movie. But kind of really bad special effects too. But this is The film done by John Landis in 1981, and it is famous makeup effects by Rick Baker, and great horror comedy, mostly horror, I would say. I think a lot of people argue this movie as being a comedy, and I think I would agree with John Landis in saying that it's not a comedy. It is a horror film that has funny parts. Special effects still look really good, all done practically, and it's, I'd say, for my money, the best werewolf movie ever made. Away We Go, which came out a few years ago. It's directed by Sam Mendes, same director who did American Beauty. But this is kind of him going sort of the Sundance direction, so it has some people say kind of a twee sensibility, and I guess sure. But it's about two young adults played by John Krasinski and Maya Rudolph, who are entering their early 30s, and they're kind of, Maya Rudolph just become pregnant, and they're trying to sort of decide where they're going to live and try and move in their life, what kind of couple they want to be. And they visit a lot of other friends who have completely different lifestyles, and they're kind of judging their relationship based on all these other ones. It looks great, cinematography is beautiful, kind of a funny, warm-hearted romantic comedy. Audition by Takashi Miike, crazy horror film from 1999, Japanese. I think there's some scenes in here that are stuff of legends. I believe that it was in the Bravo's Top 100 Scares that Rob Zombie said this was the only horror movie in recent years he can remember actually scaring him, so that has to say something. Basically, this is kind of the Japanese version of a Fatal Attraction type story, a crazy ex-girlfriend kind of movie. But it, Miike goes some places that American directors never would. It does have sort of a surreal edge to it too, which I don't think a lot of people talk about. There is question of what's actually happening in this movie. I mean, there's scenes that are very horrific and really jarring and really will take your breath away. But then at the end of the movie does question as to whether or not these scenes actually happened. So I say, if you've seen this movie and all you remember is the horror stuff, look at it again, because I think it's a lot more of a psychological drama in a lot of ways. So it's actually a really smart movie too, not just a gore fest, although the gore does pay off. Attack the Block, just got this year. This is one of my favorite movies of last year, 2011, British creature feature, sort of a Goonies-esque sort of thing done by Joe Cornish, who is a collaborator with Edgar Wright most of the time, but this was his first feature-length film, and a really fun one too. I won't talk about it too much because a lot of people already have. As Good as It Gets, this came out in 1996, 1997, I think. And it's another Jack Nicholson movie, also with Greg Kinnear and Helen Hunt in there, directed by James L. Brooks. Maybe the last really good movie he's done. Last time he's been nominated for Best Picture also, but in my opinion, maybe should have won that year. I think this was the year that Titanic won, but this was up against it, and I really love this movie a lot. I saw this movie at a very young age. I saw it when I was in 6th grade, and it's a very adult comedy. I'm not saying it because of sexual stuff exactly, but just the concepts, the ideas, the characters are all mostly adult concerns. But as a kid, even at that age, I really connected to the humanity of this movie, and this was one of the first movies I would say is very instrumental in my love of characters in film. I think anyone who's watched a lot of my videos knows that the thing that I look for in movies is characters, respect for the character, and well-rounded, well-motivated characters. And this movie is definitely that, as well as a lot of other James L. Brooks films. Art School Confidential. This is directed by Terry Zwigoff and written by Daniel Klaus. They previously did the movie Ghost World together, which I also like quite a bit. And I was interested in seeing this movie because I'm an art school kid. I went to art school for college, and that's what I got my degree in. And there's a lot of humor in jokes that have to do with going to art school and dealing with critiques and dealing with art teachers and dealing with the competitive students and that kind of stuff. That whole aspect of the movie I love, and I could watch this movie 100 times just for those scenes alone. However, there's also a subplot that has to do with a murder mystery around the school. Not so interesting, and actually I don't think pays off very well, and really kind of hobbles the movie. But for that art school parody stuff, this movie's worth seeing, and for me, worth owning. Apocalypse Now, the Francis Ford Coppola Full Disclosure edition. This is the Super Double Dragon Deluxe edition that I believe is the best edition that you can buy right now on Blu-ray. Looks fantastic, great movie. It's Apocalypse Now. Have no reason to really talk about this other than to say, if you're a real movie fan, this should be in your collection. One of my all-time favorite comedies of all time, that was redundant, is Annie Hall. And if you just watched my top 5 romance video recently, you'll see that this was in my list. I think it might have been number 2. And I love this movie a lot. This is, I think, the definitive Woody Allen comedy. One of Diane Keaton's best performances, one of Woody Allen's best screenplays, and it breaks narrative in a lot of ways. It breaks the fourth wall. He talks to the camera a lot. It goes into animation, strange things like that all throughout the movie, and some absurdist humor every once in a while. But at heart, it is a good romantic comedy, and a lot of movies since this movie has been ripping off this movie. Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, directed by Adam McKay, starring Will Ferrell. What's there to say? It's Anchorman. American Splendor, starring Paul Giamatti, and this is sort of an interesting movie, I think, because it's a comedy and it has a movie-like structure, but it breaks that every once in a while and kind of goes into documentary for about 5 to 10 minute segments, and then goes back into movie. And so you see the actors playing the characters, then you see the actual people that these actors are playing out of real life. It has to do with a underground comic artist from the 70s named Harvey Pekar, who also doubled as a file clerk at a hospital, who was kind of a angry East Coast Jewish kind of cynical dude, regular everyday sort of salt of the earth guy, and who complains a lot, and that's sort of his thing, and that was what his comic was famous for. And it sort of chronicles his life and his marginal success in life. And I think this is one of Paul Giamatti's best performances ever, and I think it's such an interesting movie and such a strange movie that is oftentimes overlooked. So I'd say if you're into if you love Paul Giamatti, or if you love independent film in general, I would say check out American Splendor. American Psycho, directed by Mary Harron, starring Christian Bale, sort of a star-making performance for him, sort of introduced himself to the world as an adult actor after years of child actor. Again, not a lot to say here that nobody else has ever said before, but this is a great movie, very dark, biting, satirical black comedy. As far as I'm concerned, I see the movie as a comedy. I know some people don't. They see it as a horror film. And certainly there's elements that are horrific, but I think ultimately the aim of this movie is to make you laugh, even though it is really razor-sharp, dark comedy. It kind of pokes fun at sort of the 80s over-the-top, overindulgent yuppie lifestyle and sort of the misogynist attitude of that time. And I could watch this movie 100 times over. I think it's just terrific. Alright, so that is part 2 of my whole damn collection, the letter A. That's everything that I own at this time. Of course, I always get more DVDs, and I'm sure there will be a few more A's that seep in there that you'll see in my other Blu-ray updates. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't seen part 1 yet, like I said, it'll be in the description below for my box sets. And be sure to come back and see part 3, which will be of the letter B in my collection. So, have fun.